Yeah, we're live. It is 6:11. I'm here a little early. I was excited. It's going to be a good show. Good show. Today we're going to talk about dynamic compression, and I'm going to show you how to calculate it. And it's fairly easy, but most people, excuse me, most people will be missing a very important part for the calculation. They'll be missing one of the variables. So I'm going to show you how to calculate dynamic compression. I'm also going to show you how to get that variable. It's very important. And then we're going to apply it to a bunch of different camshafts that I ran and check the dynamic compression. We can compare that versus power. Got a lot of cool stuff, actually. So let's talk about dynamic compression first of all. The way that, and then we'll work backward to your missing variable. So we have dynamic compression. What is it? Well, static compression basically is the relationship between what the volume is when the piston's at bottom dead center versus what the volume is if the piston's at top dead center. And so we do that in a ratio. Basically, it's 10 when it's all the way down and it's 1 when it's all the way up. So if it's 10-1 or 8-1 or 9-1, higher compression adds more power. So if you go from 8-1 to 9-1 on a given V8 motor, typically you gain 3 to 4% in power. So that means if you had a 300 horsepower motor and you went 1 point in compression better, you would gain between between 9 and 12 horsepower. So 3 to 4%. And that 3 to 4% only works, in my opinion, between around 8-1 to 12-1. Higher than that, the gains get less. Lower than that, the gains get less. So in that sweet spot range, I think that you get these kinds of gains. So that's why static compression is important. That's why people put, there's a lot of ways that we can get that. We can get that through changing to, from dish to flat top to dome pistons. We can make the combustion chamber smaller, make the head gasket smaller in diameter. We can make it thinner. There are lots of ways to do it. Dynamic compression is basically what's going on in there while the motor is running, while it's spinning. So we do that. The camshaft comes into play. So how much cylinder filling are you getting and all of that stuff. So it's very important. or it's not as important as a lot of people think it is, but it is another measurement that tells us how do we, how can we use this as a metric to gauge other things. What you'll see online with the people that are dynamic compression people, because I think a lot of them have just discovered what this is, and they're like, oh yeah, this is the end all be all. It's not. There is a correlation between how much static compression you can run. People always ask, can I run 12-1 on my pump gas motor? Yes, you can. And the way that you do that is you put a really big camshaft in it and you drop the dynamic compression. And then that way, with lower dynamic compression, what tends to happen is you make the thing less likely to detonate. And so if you're trying to run it on a particular octane, if you're not concerned about octane, then lots of compression, big camshaft, all of that stuff is good. But there is, for the dynamic compression people, they use a range of dynamic compression. Well, if you're running a street motor on pump gas, you have to have this kind of dynamic compression ratio. We're going to talk at the end about why that's not the only determining factor that's not the only thing that determines like how much dynamic compression you can run in terms of detonation. It's not the only thing that makes the car detonate. So even if you have that dynamic compression, if you have these other things going against you, that's not going to allow that to happen. And if you don't have these other things, you can go even higher and all that. So how do we calculate our dynamic compression? Well, we need some variables, first of all. But if everybody can come with me to what I want you to do is go on your magic box, go on your computer and type in Wallace Racing Dynamic Compression Calculator. There are other places that have it. This is the one that I use, but this information will basically be universal for all of the various places that we use this information to calculate your dynamic compression. So we go to Wallace Racing. I don't want that. When we go to Wallace Racing Dynamic Compression Calculator, it's going to ask you the following things. So if you bring that up on your screen, it's going to ask you the number of cylinders, what the bore size is, what the stroke size is, because they're determining displacement, what the rod length is, what the static compression ratio is, and this is usually the next one is usually the variable that people don't know. And I'm going to show you how to get it. But the next one is the inlet valve closes, the inlet valve closing point. What is that number? What is that inlet valve closing in degrees? So sometimes that's a hard one. They also have a variable box for boost pressure and target altitude, because the higher that you go up in altitude, the more static compression you can get away with, and yada, yada, yada. So we can start plugging in our numbers. And what I'm going to do is we're going to plug in the information for a 5.3 liter LS that I've run a bunch of cams on, so that we can figure out what this is. So here, let's go through that. So the number of cylinders, obviously 8, because it's a 5.3 liter V8. What is the bore size? 3,780. What is the stroke? We know for a 5.3, it's 3.622. The factory rod length on an LS is 6,098, except on the 4, except on the 4.8. The static compression ratio, they varied by depending on which exact combination you had, but we're going to do this as an LM7, which is a dish piston, which is 9.5 to 1. So the next thing we need, though, is that we're not going to have any boost, and we're going to say that our target altitude is at sea level. So we're going to zero both of those out. But the one thing that we're missing is our inlet valve closing in degrees. So what is that, or how do we find that out? Well, you're just asking for valve events. And so what we need to do to find out our valve events is we need basically 3 things. We need the intake duration, we need the exhaust duration, we need the lobe separation angle. Now we'll need a 4th thing really when we get there, but I didn't utilize that 4th thing. We'll talk about it. So the way that you get that number is we then open up our Summit Racing cam timing calculator. So if you do a search for Summit cam timing calculator, that will come up. And then when you get that, it will ask you, okay, what is the intake duration of your cam? In our case, we're going to put in a factory LM7 camshaft. So that has 191 degrees of intake duration. Then it'll ask you what your exhaust duration is. Well, in the case of our LM7, it's 190 degrees of exhaust duration. And then it'll ask you what the lobe separation angle in the case of that LM7 camshaft, and they have an early and late one. It varies by a little bit, but the one that we're going to put in there, the lobe separation angle on that LM7 camshaft is 115.5 degrees. And then all you have to do is look down at the little thing there that says update, and then we update it. And then what it'll do is it'll populate all the rest of the little variable boxes. So it'll give you the center line, the opening and closing events for the intake, the opening and closing events for the exhaust, and it'll also provide you overlap. So I want you to look on our LM7 camshaft. Excuse me. We have negative 40.5 degrees of overlap, meaning not only does it have very little, it has to the far extreme, basically no overlap, and by a lot, by negative 40 degrees. So that's a lot. It's a very mild, it's the mildest of all of the factory camshafts. And so it's, overlap. The overlap number is an indication of how much can give you an indication of how much of a performance cam it is. A negative 40, very, very mild. A negative 20, less mild. A negative 10, even less mild. 0 overlap, even less mild. And then positive numbers will go into like performance cams with overlap. Overlap is not your enemy. But now that we have this, the important number that we're looking for our Wallace Racing dynamic compression calculator for this LM7 camshaft is the intake close number. So if we look at that, that's 31 degrees on the intake. I think that's right. Yeah, that's the intake side. So it's 31 degrees. So we go back to Wallace Racing, and where it says inlet valve closes, and we put in 31. ABDC. Yeah. Okay, so we put in 31, and so we have 8 cylinders, 37800 bore, 3622 stroke, 6098 rod length, 9.5 to 1 static compression, and our inlet valve close point is 31 degrees. We press the little calculate button there, and it does its magic thing. We got to scroll down a little bit, and right below our empty boxes now, it says we have a static compression of 9.5 to 1. Effective stroke is 3.44 inches. Our dynamic compression is 9.07. So our dynamic compression is lower than our static compression, which is normally the case. And it also gives you some other information. Your dynamic cranking compression, or dynamic cranking pressure is 192.53. So I think that's saying that our cranking compression would be 192. Interestingly enough, when I actually tested that, it wasn't that high. Ours was 175. But that's okay. And I would go by our gauge, since we used our gauge to register all of these camshafts. And in some cases, this calculated number that I've plugged in for all of these is very, very similar to the one that we actually got in the case of the stock one. In the case of a couple of others, it didn't match up. So now we have our dynamic compression. So that's our compression basically with that camshaft of 9 to 1. So here, this begs the question. Well, Richard, do I want a big dynamic compression number? Well, probably not. Do I want a low one? Yes, you do. What you want, what we've seen here is, so I ran some dynamic compression ratio numbers for an LM7 cam, an LS2 cam, an LS9 cam, and then 3 aftermarket cams. One of them was the 224-232 from Crane that I use a lot, and I did in this test. One of them was a 210-218 cam, and the other one was a weird 208-200. So a reverse pattern camshaft, and we got some interesting results there. We got very, very high cranking compression on that. We got kind of a medium dynamic compression of 8.8. So the dynamic compression was lower than the LM7 is in that mode, and that camshaft made more power. But we had others that were comparable to that made a lot more power. For instance, we had our 210-218 cam had a very similar 8.72 cranking compression, but it made a lot more power. I mean, it made 25, 30, it made 36 more horsepower. And you might be thinking, well, yeah, Richard, but did it make more torque? Yeah, it made a lot more torque. It made 11 more foot-pounds at the peak, and basically made more power everywhere. It's kind of a better camshaft. So the interesting thing too is on all of these camshafts, when you're doing these dynamic compression calculations, is like I said, it also gives you overlap on all of these. So I have overlap on all of these cams, and as you might imagine, all of the factory cams have the overlap on the factory camshafts is, it's a big negative number, because they have no overlap. Not only do they have no overlap, but they have a lot of no overlap. So the LM7 is negative 40.5. Where's our LS2? Negative 24. Our LS9 is negative 24.5. The weird 208-200 camshaft is negative 26. And then our performance cams, our 210-218 cam, negative 18. And then our biggest cam, not surprisingly, or 224-232, had negative 2 degrees. So it still didn't have any overlap, and this is a number at 50, but it had negative 2 degrees. So it's definitely getting into the performance camshaft stuff. And it had, if we take a look at that as a function of, let's say idle quality, all of the factory cams were in the 20s. The smallest camshaft had 22.5 inches of idle vacuum. The 208 cam had the same amount, the 208-210. The LS2 had 21. The LS9 had 20. The little 210-218 cam had 20.3. And then, not surprisingly, the 224 cam had the lowest idle vacuum, but it still had 17.8 inches of idle vacuum. And I think that was at 800 RPM, though. So, lots and lots of data here on dynamic compression. But one of the questions for dynamic compression for a lot of people is, okay, you'll have people tell you, oh, you can't run more than a dynamic compression of 8.4, 8.3, or whatever number they're spouting is the absolute that you can run on pump gas. Here's my discussion on that. My discussion is that it depends. That number doesn't dictate detonation. So detonation can be caused by a lot of things. It can be caused by too much timing. It can be caused by hot spots in the combustion chamber or the piston. It can be caused by quench. It can be caused by inlet air temperature. It can be caused by water temperature. It can be caused, there are so many variables that can help or alter the detonation threshold. The dynamic compression isn't the only thing. And yet there will be lots of people out there in internet world telling you that this is the thing. This determines that. The dynamic compression is not the same thing as cylinder pressure, because we can see that. Let's see our dynamic compression stuff here. So to give you an idea, our lowest dynamic compression, was actually the LS9. And it had, it was the only one that it made more peak torque than was the factory LM7 camshaft. But very, very close to that was the camshaft with the lowest dynamic compression made the most torque. So it made 412 foot-pounds, and that was the biggest cam. That was a 224 cam. So those things are obviously correlated. And so the camshaft that made the most torque made the most cylinder pressure. So you would think that it made the most cylinder pressure, that it would be the most likely potentially to detonate with the highest cylinder pressure, and that would correlate with the lowest dynamic compression. And yet you're not getting that out. You're not getting that out there in internet world, because there's more to it than that. Again, just like we talked about this morning, we talked about the cranking compression also, and the cranking compression in relation to a lot of these things. Again, the cranking compression is a good thing to have. It's a good variable to check. Primarily, I use it just to make sure that the motor's okay. If we have a problem and the motor's not making the power that it should, and we think it seems like it has a cylinder down, or we're just checking to make sure, hey, what is this thing healthy? We go in and check all the holes. On a cranking compression is the first thing we do. The next thing we do is a leak down tester. If the cranking compression shows something, the cranking compression for us is just a big generalized checkup. It's like the doctor checking your heart. Yeah, the heart's beating. It's probably okay. As long as they're, excuse me, as long as they're all the same, we're okay. Then we just continue. It's something else. It's a spark plug. It's a plug wire. It's something else. It's a broken spring or whatever it is. It's not that. It has compression. So now all we need to do is have fuel and spark and at the right time, and then we're okay. But so that's a big generalized thing. So we went over that today, trying to correlate, and because this is the other thing that people will tell you, oh yeah, the thing with the biggest cranking compression makes the most power. That's 100% false. We know that that's not the case, because the highest cranking compression oftentimes is the thing that has the smallest camshaft in it, and we know that that's not going to make the most power. The one that had the highest cranking compression did not make either the highest peak torque or the highest peak horsepower. It didn't do either one of those. The one that had the lowest cranking compression made the most power. And so, these people want these absolutes, but they're just not. That's not it, especially in the case of these things. But the thing that I like about this is that if you go in and go to the Wallace Racing compression calculator and go to Summit Racing, do the cam timing, get the valve events that you need, there's just a lot of information online, and there's a lot of good stuff. And especially like in these cases, if you can correlate it with actual testing that you did, so we can see, because one of the things that testing the dynamic the dynamic compression did, when we tested that, it also spit out a number that gave us what they thought the cranking compression would be. And so we correlate that to what it actually was when we did a physical test. Nothing but good information. So we will start our poll. Okay, do you ever look up and calculate dynamic compression when choosing a cam for your motor? So do you go to the trouble of doing that? Do you ever look that stuff up? Let's see. Could we use my 427 with 11.5 to 1 compression in my cam as an example? Yeah, that's real easy. So you have a 242, 258, and a 112. So your number would be, your intake close would be 53. What's the rod length in your thing? Is it an aftermarket setup? I think it's probably, I'm gonna put 6125. Sean, I need more information. Okay, it's 11.5 to 1. Thank you. $53. I didn't put any advance or anything in there. Your dynamic compression is 9.98 to 1, and it's saying your cranking compression should be 217. Variables. That's right. Chad, get away. Sally. Mustang, Sally. Bobby, what's going on? Cools. Turbo Sentra. Currently have 28 needles in my neck and back watching on acupuncture table. Wow. Does that help you? That's awesome. Richard says, next step is YouTube. Nope, got a commercial. Wait, what do I put in the advanced field? Does your cam have advance in it? When I did it, I didn't put advance in it. Sensor's 8.8 to 1. IVC is going to determine cranking compression. I see everyone is listening. Yeah, weird that not a single OEM uses the DCR calculation. I don't think that they need to, even if they knew that data, which the engineers are going to know, I don't think that they need to advertise that. L96 has good factory heads, yes. So what you guys are saying is if I'm knocking, it means I need a bigger cam. Yep, that's very simple. Or an intercooler on your boosted application. Thanks video is really full of data like dynamic compression without saying that word. Speaking of cam size, how does rocker ratio typically affect the power band on a stock type factory cam? So would you be talking about a 300 forward by any chance? That's pretty easy to multiply. I guess some smart people look at the keyboard when they type. I hope you're not talking about me because I am not smart. And I've never taken typing, despite the fact that I've been typing for a living for decades now. This could be interesting. I'm aiming for 8.5 to 1 dynamic, 175 to 180 PSI. I'm sure that's a cranking compression. This with a tight quench of 40, aluminum 5.7 LS engine should be able to run fine on 91. Okay. Just looked it up on my build sheet. No, because BTR cams don't give you the 06 numbers. Well, why do you need an 06 number? Would the process be different for a double overhead cam engine to calculate dynamic compression? As long as you knew what the values are, because it's only asking you for the intake. You could vary it by altering the exhaust. You could definitely alter dynamic compression by doing that. I've calculated the entropy of an engine per cycle. Counting the stock sensor cam specs, 240, 244, 114, 370 lift. That's an advertised number, though. You need the to put it in the Summit thing. You need a 50 number. My rear mount turbo and intercooler sees extremely low inlet air temperatures versus before the intercooler. I don't understand what you're saying there. Are you saying that your intercooler is working really well? Cranking compression indicates that the cylinder can support combustion, more of a go, no-go kind of thing. Yeah, people don't realize how fast that's happening. We've run some really sketchy cylinders. I didn't run an intercooler when I first did my rear mount. Intercoolers are always a good idea. They're always recommended. Dynamic compression. I've been yelled at many times for that. How can you never use dynamic compression? I said, okay, let's say that I went and did what I just did. So now what? what do I know other than having a value there for whatever the cam was? And now I can, I guess, correlate another number to another number. What would be awesome is to correlate all of that to knock counts now under the same conditions. Then that would be something. -7 degrees of overlap, good for a 6-liter daily driver. I probably wouldn't pick one that has that for a daily. Most of the daily stuff. I mean, the 224 cam, lots of guys have driven that. I drove a 224 232 cam in my Mustang for years and years and years. And so you certainly can. And I even did it on a low compression 302, which I would argue is way worse than doing it on an LS. But anymore, I wouldn't pick that. Leak down verifies cylinder chamber sealing at TDC. And if an issue can help diagnose where the issue is. How would a double pattern cam compare to a single pattern cam, or is it a bit more to do with overlap? Well, a single pattern versus a dual pattern can definitely change overlap. Because if you see the reverse split cam, if we compare the reverse split cam, which is a 208 intake versus the 210 intake, the 208 intake, because it has a 200 exhaust, and the 210 intake has a 218 exhaust, has 8 degrees more. Yeah, 8 degrees more overlap. So as we go to and this went to an extreme, but as you go to a single pattern, if you keep the intake the same, as we go to a single pattern, you reduce overlap, which we see on the dyno too, because we tend to make more low speed power. And then if you go the reverse of that, so that you have less exhaust than intake, in our case, we just messed the cam up, but you would further reduce overlap. If you have variable cam timing, you can determine dynamic compression at each advanced retard position. Find your ideal position for various things without just dynoing it at each position. Well, what is going to be your metric then? Or would you just do a cranking compression with each cam position? And I don't think you're going to be able to determine that by cranking compression. But you could determine dynamic. You could calculate dynamic compression if you knew what. I mean, you'd have to degree the cam a lot to get all that information. And I don't know what you mean by the ideal position for various things. I don't know how you're going to determine what's ideal without testing it. Sean, your 248, 250, 242, 258 cam is your daily. So it helps that you have a much bigger motor. You have a variable LSA. You have to do all those positions too. It's a lot. If you're swinging an intake and an exhaust cam, it's a lot. Which I noticed that some dynamic compression ratio calculators say to add 15 degrees to the intake valve close point at 50. I don't know. I don't know why the others do that. I can't calculate mine because BTR didn't give me the seat-to-seat numbers. Also, random question: would rocker ratio significantly affect idle quality? You're only the lift. I don't think is going to. You're affecting duration a little bit. But let's see, given the change in duration that we saw, where are we at here? We had some pretty big changes in duration on the factory cams. So we went from 191 to 211. We only changed idle vacuum by 1 inch. So it's not really very much. Also helps it's a manual car, 3,100 pounds. Yeah, all that's good. Got a 224, 224, 600 lift with a 114. .53 with flat tops, 15 taken off of the heads. What heads did you have on it? Are they 706 heads or are they 799s? Richard, thank you for all your 302 work. Helped me out significantly with my AFRs as well as my dual Victor Jr. to my RPM. Is all that math needed for dropping cams on LS with flat top pistons? No. Like I said, it just gives you more information. Texas Speed dumpster fire cam. That's what they called that. A 224, 224. Will more fuel pressure, like for instance going over 58 psi, help cool down the air temps on a higher compression LS? No, because you're going to be spraying the same amount of fuel. And if anything, if you raise the pressure, I'm sure that they would tell you this, if you raise the fuel pressure, you're going to elevate the fuel temperature. What's the difference between dynamic compression ratio and regular compression ratio? We went over that earlier, but static compression ratio is just a measurement between the piston at bottom dead center and the piston at top dead center, and what the ratio changes between the big opening versus the small opening. Dynamic compression is when the motor is spinning with the cam timing. I ran a 264, 274, 106, 355 for several years, my daily driver. So a manual trans car, 243 with a bit of work. Okay. So the rockers will just give it the slightest of lumps. I don't know that you change the idle quality very much. I think to me, the LS2 cam idle's the same as an LM7 cam. 1 inch of idle vacuum doesn't significantly change the idle, in my opinion. How hard is it to make a 5.3 to a 6.0? Just bore it. I've seen people do that, but you have to check and see how thick the wall is after you do that. A lot of them won't allow you to go that far. Some of them will overheat and some of them will break. I don't want a bigger cam. I want to keep the torque. Did you ever know Emma Elgin, one of the sharpest cam guys in the country? He would look at dynamic compression when selling you a cam. Okay. I don't know him, if that's a him. This dynamic compression seems to be an okay calculation, though not sure how the information will be used, other than a very broad general idea of what could be possible. I think I think where these numbers would be valuable is if you had a shop and you ran a whole bunch of one kind of motor or one kind of engine family. You ran a bunch of LS stuff, and you ran a bunch of Camaros, you ran a bunch of Corvettes, and you ran a bunch of trucks, and you were tuning them every day, all day, every day for decades. And you tried a bunch of different cams in them. And then you either determined or the customers determined that, hey, look, I'm getting detonation on 91 with the tune that you put in. You're like, okay, well, I had 26 degrees in there. I can't run 26 degrees. Need to run it to 24 or whatever. And then over that period of time, you started to realize that, and you use this dynamic compression ratio thing. Hey, when I went to this and had this much timing, that this became a problem. And then you do a spreadsheet, which nobody's going to do this. I would definitely look at it like this. But if you could correlate all that information and go, yeah, this much dynamic compression on a Camaro is okay. It's not okay on a truck. And then when I do that, I have to run this amount of timing to make it not detonate. And if you could get, you could correlate all that information, then you would know when you go to order another cam, okay, it's for a heavy truck. It's going to be run on pump gas. Okay, I probably shouldn't go over this kind of dynamic compression. So I should probably put a little bit bigger camshaft in, and the guy still wants to run with a stock converter. So can I do that? You would be figuring all that out. Turbo 400 with a 5,000 stall. A Turbo 400 with a 5,000 stall was your daily driver. I won't go below 14-1. Way to go, Matt. It seems cylinder pressure under operating conditions where the cylinder ram filling would have a direct impact on that intake runner lengths, etc. It all does when the motor's running. And that's an interesting point. And again, when I talked about earlier, when I talked about all of the other variables that could make or break or alter the detonation threshold of a motor, doing this dynamic compression, you're looking at only a couple of things. You're looking at static compression and valve events. But when you're running the motor, what would bring it into detonation more so would be a long runner intake manifold, because a long runner intake manifold is going to make more torque than a short runner one. So a short runner one would be like having a bigger cam in it, so that it would be less likely to detonate. It's also less likely to make power, but until the top of the RPM range. And so you'd be doing effectively the same thing, but the dynamic compression does not take intake runner length into account. So it doesn't take, like I said, doesn't take all the variables into account that definitely affect detonation threshold. I did find a place that makes 230 at 50 claims and cams and claims 10,000 RPM, but that's on a 1.6 liter. Do you have a video or recommend somewhere that deep dives into cam specs, overlap, lift, etc.? Every time I try to learn it, it just blows my mind. I think if you go to like ISKI or Comp, or I know in the catalogs, they have some pretty good information. What gap do you guys recommend for top ring and bottom ring on an LS turbo? You need to put ring gap in there to the tune of 6.5 thousandths per inch of bore. Trying to build the perfect engine is like trying to get a hole-in-one blindfolded with the world's best putter. Is that the same as BMEP? Yes, BMEP is basically torque. You work with Steve Rollet. Is he doing okay? Yes, he did retire, but I have talked to him several times. Steve's a good guy. Link up specs on my Gen 5 LT4 cam. Brian Tooley has, and he's actually had them for a while, the Truck North versions of the Gen 5 L83 cams. And they'll also work on LT1s and L86s and stuff. Apparently it's 189, 223. Okay. It's pretty small. Does running different fuels change your approach to compression? Yes, it does. The octane is really one of the determining factors of how much compression you can run. 7.5 to 1 pump gas, 8 to 1 max pump 92, 9-to-1 max on any fuel. Are those, Eraser, are those, you're suggesting those as dynamic compression stuff? Because 8-to-1 dynamic compression for max on 92 is not accurate. We run stuff on that's higher than that all the time. And that's every day. Every day LS do more than that. How much does LSA change cranking compression? Is that your question, CC? Well, the good thing is I'm not going to give you the fish, but I'm going to teach you how to fish, and that's go to Wallace Racing dynamic compression. Well, you're going to have to do this two ways. If you're talking about changing dynamic compression, what you'll have to do is put a camshaft into your Summit Racing cam timing calculator, and then get the number that you want, get the closing point for the intake, and write that down, and then change the LSA and recalculate it, like go from 108 to 115, and just do a big sweep so you get a big number, and then see what number that changes, and then plug both those numbers into your Wallace Racing and see how it effectively changes the dynamic compression. What we saw was a change from intake valve closing, for instance. So let's look at an LS2 and an LS9. So we went from a intake valve closing of 48 on the LS9 to a 38 on the LS2. And that changed it from 8.84 to 8.44. So 0.4 of a point. Is it true that big block Chevy tunnel rams like tight LSA camshafts, even with the AFR 305s, due to big block Chevys being undervalved? I don't think that any of that's true. What I can tell you is, first of all, my questions would be which tunnel ram, because there's like a number of them. I'm not going to say 10, but how many ever there are lots of different tunnel rams, and the different tunnel rams respond differently. They offer different power curves because the runners are different length, they're different size, and so what kind of combination are you running it on? What kind of RPM are you running on? Different tunnel rams have shorter or longer runners. They have different plenum volumes. They have all kinds of changes that don't fit in. There isn't a tunnel ram thing that they all make the same. So the variations could be 100 horsepower. So it's a lot. So I would argue is that it doesn't matter about the AFR 305 heads. It doesn't matter that it's under valve, because I don't agree that it is. But what I would say is that if you run a combination with a tight LSA cam, if you keep everything else the same, and then you run it with a wider LSA cam and you keep everything the same, that effect that you see is probably going to be the same on all the tunnel rams that you change, because the tunnel rams are going to affect the power. But if you do that cam swap with each one of them, I think what you see is the variation that you see between the two cams, that you would see that on all of you'd see that kind of change with all the tunnel rams. I don't think a tunnel ram one likes a specific cam. LS62 half-ton truck engine with low buck truck. Is it worth keeping the stock intake and exhaust, or put truck 92 millimeter and long tube headers to max the power at low RPM? You're not going to pick up anything down low, way down low, with the Trailblazer SS intake manifold with the bigger throttle body. You will pick up power down low with long tube headers compared to the stock exhaust manifolds. The Trailblazer SS will make more power than the truck manifold, but it does it at higher engine speeds. Trying to build a 464 valve, but told to stroke it to a 5 liter. Is that recommended? You got to tell me more about what you're trying to do. Intake close. Chamber designs have improved since demo taught. Good for an extra 2+ points of compression. On the seat timing, not at 06. Would it be a good idea to run a compression test with nitrous? If so, which compression test would be best? Do you mean to run a compression test on your motor before you run nitrous? No, nitrous will add power to whatever you have. The only reason we run compression tests usually, like I said, is just to make sure that the motor is okay. So whatever your motor is doing, NA, the nitrous will just add to that. Most engines intake close will fall between 70 and 80 degrees on the seat. Have you seen the movie The World's Fastest Indian? Yeah, several times. It's really good. I love, my favorite thing is when he's going through tech. That's having been through tech a bunch at Bonneville. I just love that. We need a combustion pressure sensor and really get some data on dynamic compression effects. Yeah, Brian has some of that data. Make sure it's not eating oil before you can spray. What I found when we run nitrous on stuff is it tends to seal the motor up. If what I look up is accurate for the LT4 cam, it makes me wonder just how much power I pick up, leaving the car alone for now because I like my warranty, but man, when it expires. That's a mild cam. I mean, even an LS9 cam is a 211, 230. It's a really wide LSA, which is how they get the thing to idle so well. But that does make it really soft down low. The real Burt Monroe story is better than the movie. Good stuff. Good times. Good times. The soft down roll gets opened up, even out by the blower. That's why they're doing it. I think from the factory is one, they want an emissions friendly motor. They want something that gets reasonable mileage. They want something that definitely has a smooth idle for people. And they also want something that's not going to be detonation prone, which softening that low and middle part of the curve with a positive displacement blower, definitely a good idea for that. I like that using compound turbos in my mind turns your engine into a turbo shaft engine. Okay. TFX will rent you the pressure transducers to help you with combustion pressures. Too expensive to buy on your own. Yeah, I need to get with Brian and I need to talk to him and find out just any data that he has on stock cams versus his own cams. Yeah, Sean, if you can run E85 on that thing, that would, those positive displacement blowers really like that. I have a saw with a blown 5.3, putting a 6.0 LQ9 engine, your low buck truck. What saw would you recommend? Well, with that camshaft, you can run a stock converter in it. But if you want to put a converter in it, you don't need very much. A 2500 or something would help. All right, Eric, we'll see you later, man. But we're actually only at the time where we would be starting. We would only just now be starting on our discussion about dynamic compression. For now, just getting everything paid off so I can add a C8 to the fleet. Okay. 464 wheel Texas block. I'm trying to get anything over 500 wheel horsepower. I'm being told by HPP and Carlton to stroke the engine and make it a 5-liter. I'm a little skeptical. I don't know about the 5-liter 4-valve stuff. I have done a 5-liter 2-valve, and it makes more power because it's bigger than a 4.6. But 500 wheel horsepower NA is that what you're trying to do? Is do it NA? Because that's going to be really hard. You can fix a soft down low with a gear and clutch pedal. No, Racer, I don't think anybody here would think that a clutch pedal is a theft deterrent. I've agreed a bunch of stock cams. Don't own anything with a torque converter. Again, even if we had numbers at 06, what what is that going to tell us that the 50 number's not already not telling us? Like the rest of the people out there, I want there to be these absolutes. I want somebody to figure out a way that I can do math and then have it tell me all the things that I want to know. I'm reasonably good at math, but I haven't found that formula yet. Do you know anything about an AR5 5-speed, and do you think the first gear is too short? I'm putting it behind a 6-liter. Well, you can always shift. I mean, into second gear if it's too short. Heavy duty clutch and lightweight flywheel, giant cam, hard to start, is very good theft deterrent. Sean, if you look at camshafts, they're measured different ways. It's the starting and ending point for the measurement. 050 is the lift point of the lobe. So you're starting the measurement from 50 thousandths, essentially up the lobe to the other side to where you reach 50 thousandths before it's at 0. 6 thousandths, like the advertised number, is starting earlier and ending later. For a future discussion, that would be great to have LSAs to help us all better understand how, when we may want to choose a tighter or wider LSA for different missions and power goals. The LSA, I don't agree that people should talk about that as an individual thing, because you need to look at what the LSA does to the camshaft, what it does to the valve events. And then unfortunately, what people want, which I was talking about earlier, is we want like an easy way to do it. Oh, if you want more low speed power, you should advance the cam, or you should run a 106 LSA and not a 112 or 115 or 118 or 122 in the case of an LS9. It's way more complicated than that. Because the other thing that you have to take into account is, okay, where do you want your power band to be? Do you want a tight LSA 190 cam? Do you want a tight LSA 200 or 210 or 220 or 230? How much piston to valve clearance that you have? It's a lot of stuff. I have quite a lot of experience with the AR5s. I put 600 foot-pounds through them. What did the AR5 come in? What was it originally equipped with or in? Have you ever dynoed a rotary? Not on the engine dyno, but yes, on the chassis dyno. No, both the Pro Charger to the 4.6. Then I wouldn't ever do a 5-liter. You have boost so that you have the ability to make 500 wheel horsepower from a supercharged 4.6 is really easy. I just want forged internals to handle the boost. Okay. It's Sean, it's 006 versus 050. You have one too many zeros in each one of those. What overlap will throw fireballs? If we could just squirt fuel and exhaust and ignite it. The old Go Fast program is probably the best program for dynamic compression. Why is there something that has to be the best thing? That's not true. All of these will give you a number. It's really easy to put numbers in there, real easy to get numbers out. One of them doesn't have to be better than the other ones. People don't have to be better than other people. That's all just ego. Air 5 came in Colorados, Hummers, Solstices. What was that transmission attached to? Like what motors were in front of that? Basically a stronger Mark III Super Trans. Tighter LSA, less intake duration seems to be the key to the Weingartner challenge, which is not relevant to most people out there that are putting LSs together. 2JC swap, Saturn, Sky, Pontiac Solstice. So if that transmission attached to the 4-cylinder, that's not the same bell housing for an LS then, right? Or is it? Maybe it is. I don't know. You're going to use an L7 clutch kit for the AR5 with a 4L60 bell housing and fab kit. So is the 4L60 bell housing, can you unbolt that? It's not part of the transmission? Inline 5-cylinder Colorados. Good question. 2Tech for me. I don't know. Big cams like more compression as all bells, but large cams need high compression. That's also not true. And I say that having run very big cams like 275, 285 cams with 8-to-1 motors. And yeah, you can look at it two ways. Part of that confusion is that all of the cam catalogs, like the Comp catalog, Crane, all of them, they all say when you start going up to big cams, needs 12-to-1 or whatever. Well, it doesn't. It's better with 12-to-1, but so is every other cam. So if you go from 10-to-1 to 12-to-1, you gain 6 to 8% power. You have a power increase between 6 and 8%. And it doesn't matter that you ran that camshaft. It doesn't matter what camshaft you did that with. If you did it with a big camshaft, that's fine. If you did it with a small camshaft, that's fine. The compression adds power no matter what. And so this thing where you add compression, the other thing is the thing that we talked about today with dynamic compression. You put a really big camshaft in it, you drop your dynamic compression down. And then when you do that, it makes a lot more power. Is 10.5-to-1 compression too high on pump gas 93 to run nitrous on a Roots blower 5.3? So are you having trouble already with running pump gas and a blower on a 5.3? You should be. You should be having to take a whole bunch of timing away. And since you're already timing limited with pump gas on a blower 5.3, I don't think I would be adding nitrous to it. When a camshaft is designed for use with a single plane intake manifold, would it work equally well as efficient with a dual plane? So yes, the camshaft, if you have two camshafts, let's say you have, because I've done this before with rec port and oval port, or rec port and oval port, rec port and cathedral port because of big blocks and LSs, and then carburetor cams and EFI cams, blower cams and NA cams. And whatever the cam does, if you have one cam that makes this amount of power and the other cam makes this amount of power, the cam that makes more power will make more power with any intake manifold. So if you do that cam test with a single plane, the bigger cam that makes more power will make more power. If you then take the single plane off and do that cam test again with a dual plane, the cam that made more power with the single plane will make more power with the dual plane. The numbers may have changed because with a dual plane, maybe it doesn't make as much total peak power. Maybe it makes more low speed power and less peak power, but there will be the same kind of difference between the two cams. I have never seen that not happen. And so I don't know what a camshaft is that's designed for a single plane. I would like somebody to show me what that is, other than it being a camshaft that would be a higher RPM camshaft, let's say, because the single plane is going to want to make power up top. So the camshaft would do likewise, assuming that you had enough cylinder head to support that also. You have a Roots blown 5.3. Building a 406 small block Chevy roller motor, aluminum Pro Max heads, okay. 11.2 with 9-to-1 dynamic compression. Do you think we'll be able to get by with 91 to 93 octane? Yes, you can easily do that. But you may not be able to run very much timing in it. Or it may be cantankerous because you're running too much water temperature. Or what are you doing to get the air temperature to it? So that's what I was talking about earlier, is I don't believe that the dynamic compression determines detonation. So we had a dynamic compression that was that on our LM7 camshaft. So would your 11.2 to 1 with that dynamic compression have the same detonation threshold as a stock LM7? Because that's what the dynamic compression is on a stock LM7. So do you think we could get away with that on a stock LM7? Do you think we run pump gas on? I know you can. I know you can run 87 on it because I run 87 in my truck all day, every day. I'm not racing it, but I have gone to wide open throttle on it. So that's what I'm talking about, is that number doesn't determine whether or not you can get away with it in terms of detonation. I'd like to see the power potential of a turbo like a GT45 with a big and small AR housing to see how it affects spool and peak power. Whether or not it changes either one of those is going to be a function of your test motor. Folks harping on dynamic compression ratio always seem to be a group super focused on some specific application, usually small block Corvette forums, picking nits. Are they arguing about rod ratio and piston flipping and stuff? Richard, you didn't answer my question last time. Have you ever run a Y pipe instead of an X pipe? That difference, did you see advantages different? No, I've never tested a single exhaust, if that's what your question is. I never have. Brian did, because I asked him to do it because he was running something like that, and he did do it. And I'll get the data and see what happened. I had another 408 small block Chevy that was 10.7, 9-to-1 dynamic. It was on the edge. It was fine on 93, but would ping on 91. And see, I would guarantee you that it's not the dynamic compression that's doing that. Because what is your chamber design? What is the timing? What is the air intake temperature? What is the water temperature? All of those things will have a big effect on that. Talking PSI or dynamic compression, where tonight's discussion is about dynamic compression, but the earlier discussion today was cranking compression. Running pump gas with 11.5 to 1 static and 9.98 dynamic, so you should be fine, I think, on that. But Richard is saying that's not the only thing. Pontiac big rod. Do you notice more carbon buildup after opening an engine you run 87 on? I don't know. I've never opened this engine up, and I have never run 87. I don't know what the motors that I get from the wrecking yard were running on. There's no way to know that. Racer D, but where are you checking dynamic compression at on the seat timing? It's not the same as the 06 number. It's not, but it doesn't matter. It's just a relative change. So all you do is get a different number, but the relative numbers stay the same. So if we have a 9 or an 8 or 7 or whatever, and then you have different numbers over here, you just go, okay, you can't do it at 9 over here, or can't do it at 7 over here, or 7.8, or whatever the number is. It's all a relative thing. But even once we have that, how do we correlate that? Dynamic compression varies with the torque curve. How do you calculate dynamic compression? I tried to look up on the page, but it just showed me this. Yeah, I went through at the very beginning of this, if you want to watch this video, on how you calculate it. And all you have to do is go to Wallace Racing dynamic compression calculator. Just look that up online, and it will tell you what information to plug in. And the only number you're probably not going to know is your intake valve close unless you have your cam there. But you can go to Summit Racing timing calculator and put your duration and lobe separation angle in there, and then it will spit out the numbers that you need to know. You only need to know one. You only need to know the intake valve close. And then you take that number and plug it into your last one in Wallace Racing and push calculate, and it'll give you all the numbers you need. Would I have to use methanol injection if I want to use nitrous on 10.5 to 1? Is this that blower motor? I would not worry about nitrous. I would try to get more timing into the motor so that you could make more power instead of running it on pump gas, because you're just limiting the power by having to not run any timing on it. My cam is listed for use with a single plane manifold, 7500, 400 LS motor, or 300 to 450 shot, 262, 82. Yeah, they recommend high compression with big camshafts, and that's a pretty good size camshaft at 262, 82. That's a really big split. Is that like a nitrous cam? Imagine calculating dynamic compression with a free valve. It matters when you're trying to compete in Engine Masters. I competed in Engine Masters and I was a finalist, and I never ran any like dynamic compression calculation ever. Small block Chevy 360, 6300 rod versus a 6-inch rod, 750 lift, 1.8 rocker, piston speed change, dynamic compression. It does ask for rod length in the dynamic compression calculator. So that's the nice thing about going to Wallace Racing and go to the dynamic compression calculator. You can change the rod length and see what effect it has on and it's giving you an average of dynamic compression, just like calculating piston speed. It's giving you a mean piston speed. It's not giving you, you'd have to do more calculations to figure out what the piston speed is at any given piston position as it passes through that position. And that's a different thing, but they're just kind of giving you an average. I ran 13.8 on 91. The cranking pressure was, well, why a big 195 to 205? Why a 10 PSI spread in that? Previous version of this engine had lower static and cranked 215 to 230. It was on 91, different camshaft. Okay. Nitrous cam for my 404. Okay. See, Sean, what I would wonder on the nitrous motor is, I don't think I would want to have a big dome on that. And on a 404, though, with 12 to 1, you probably can get away with close to a flat top on that, I would think. I would be less worried about the static compression than I would be about the detonation sensitivity, because I think that you can add enough nitrous to offset the 11.5 to 12 to 1 difference. Ran high 10s with the BTR4, Holly high ram 85, maximized tune on 150 shot. Should be fun with the 404. Yeah, the 404 should make a lot more. What size motor was that, Sean? Was it a 6-liter or something? or was it bigger than that? Do you ever look up and calculate dynamic compression when choosing a cam for your motor? 70% said no, and 30% said yes. Probably because I know Dave said yes. 6-liter, 243, 6-speed. Okay. That's kind of what I thought. And it had a BTR stage 4 cam in it. And a high ram E85 and a 150 shot. Cool. Pretty sure Engine Masters did an X versus a Y. Did they do a single exhaust? But Brian already has the data. I think he may have even emailed it over to me. 342 gears and Z51 trans. BTR stage 4. Thanks for all the testing. Dean. Nitrous is great. Neil, what is nitrous great for? What are you doing to beer cans with it? V-hilling? Oh, chilling. Okay, yeah. Didn't Mythbusters do that with a CO2 fire extinguisher? That's pretty cool too. CO2's got to be way negative also, right? Sean, you don't have to do that, man. It's all good, but thank you very much. So I will buy Lisa beverages. That's just all great for my quarterly torture session. Shadow Ops, what's going on? I started early tonight because I was so excited about talking about dynamic compression. Dynamic compression. So let's see what happens when we change the rod length. So we'll use Sean's motor. It's 4-125 bore, 4-inch stroke. You got a 6-125 rod, 11.5 to 1 static, a 53-degree close point. And so let's put a long rod in it. Let's go from a 6-125. Let's go to I wanted to go to a 6-600, but let's just go to a 6-200. So we had 217.72, 9.98, 0.42. Okay, let's see what our long rod does. So we change it from a 6-125 to a 6-200. Okay, our effective stroke dropped from 3.42 to 3.41. We lost effective stroke. Our dynamic compression went from 9.98 to 9.95. And our dynamic cranking compression went from 217.72 to 216.88. So the longer rod effectively dropped everything. So I can't start another argument here. So if we put the longer rod on it and we drop dynamic compression and dropped effective stroke, does that mean that the thing is less likely to detonate with a longer rod in it? Oh my gosh. HP tuner is a tune dumb, correct? Is there any way of verifying an untouched stock tune? I don't know. Does anybody know about HP tuners? Summit cam timing calculator gives you the intake close at 50. I believe the Wallace Racing needs the actual close. With the same crank, would that just hit the head? Yeah, but we're not just changing the rod and not changing the piston. We're changing the compression height of the piston to put that longer rod in it. That's assumed in this calculation. The UEM calculator works good, and they ask for intake close point after bottom dead center 50 plus 15 degrees. Okay. I was working in the garage. Is this the same stream? It was the same one that I started at 6 o'clock. HB Tuners has a compare function to compare against other tune files, and you can get a stock one from HB Tuners. My job was to show people how to use the dynamic compression calculator. Thanks for the rod 411. I would have thought it would have been higher compression. I'll have to research Wallace Racing. I wanted to compare the 4.8 to the LS1, LS6, and then what's my iron LS1, LS6 since it's using 25-pound injectors, throttled by wire. Oh, you want to look at the factory tunes on those? I would like to see what the factory tune is at wide open throttle I would like to look at various factory tunes and see. That way I can simulate those when I run them on the engine dyno. So we can plug the numbers in. Let's say that the factory only has, wide open throttle at 100 kPa, only has 24 degrees or 20 degrees or whatever the number is. I'd like to see what that curve is. If you like when you run a truck or a car on the chassis dyno and just nail the throttle at whatever your starting point is. Let's say you're running from 2000 to 6500 on the chassis dyno. What is the timing curve sweep? And then I could go in and put that on the engine dyno and go, okay, here's what the factory curve is. And here's why when people tune it, here's why they can get more power, because they've added 6 degrees of timing everywhere. Richard, I'm getting into building up a motor. It's my first one. Just want to say thank you. Happy to help. HB tuners comparing files can be tricky because they can change files mid-year sometimes. Yeah, and just see what all the differences were and what the tuner put in to get it running with the truck Norris. Yeah, that would be good. I was told by James Short, who used to do the tuning over at Brian's place, and then now he's been doing it the whole time, but because he does short tuning. But I asked him what would happen if you took a truck Norris cam, for instance, and put it in a stock 5.3 truck. Would it still run? He goes, yeah, it will still run. And he goes, and I said, well, it won't hurt itself. It goes to wide open throttle. He said, no, more than likely it'll just be too rich. He said, because it won't be giving the right amount of fuel. And he said it probably would be detuned, if anything, but it would be safe, is what he said. Now, I don't know anything about the factory tunes, so. Factory uses air mass. I know, but if you make 4 or 5 or 10 runs in a row, the motor makes the same amount of power and has the same air mass, we would have the same timing curve. As long as all of the other variables were the same, as long as the temperature was the same, we would still have some timing curve. And so I just want to duplicate that. On Tuner Pro, you can read the stock ECU tune. One more minute. I have been here a long time. Lots of data. I was surprised that 224 cam only has -2 degrees. Wow. My Truck Plus cam has more overlap than that 224 cam does. That's interesting. What is the 112 for that? But the sloppy stage 2 has more overlap than both of those. Cool. See what you can do? Grand Prix GXP 5.3 liter intake for a 6 liter Gen 3. Will that work? Yes, but that's an LS4, right? That's a terrible intake. That's the worst one that they made. Walsh Racing Dynamic Compressor asks for intake valve closing, but is that an 06 or the seat? It doesn't say which. That's why I put the 50 number in. You said that there are truck and truck plus variants for the Gen 5 engines. No, what I said is Brian Tooley Racing has a truck Norris for the Gen 5 engines. I don't have any for Gen 5s. Grand Prix front wheel drive, not a G8, which is rear wheel drive. Is a GXP? That's front wheel drive, right? Why is a 6.2 from an Escalator Yukon not mentioned? Which I don't know what you mean. I have videos up with it. That's an L92, right? Or a version of that. If I get a base C8 instead of a Z06, I might do a truck Norris or a Pro Charger. That will be sporty. And on that note, my 1 minute is up. Thank you guys all for tuning in, and I will be back tomorrow.